Welcome back to another episode of really important conversation. Today we're talking about when the abuse has no bruises, how to spot, speak about, and heal from emotional abuse and harm. And with me today is Annette Oltmans of the M3ND Project. Hi, Annette.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about our conversation.
Me too.
And you know this, emotional abuse is real, and yet it's one of the most misunderstood and mishandled forms of harm, certainly in family court. And if you've ever been told it's not that bad or struggle to explain what's really happening behind your closed doors, today's conversation will bring clarity and validation. In the age of social media and self-diagnosis, words like narcissist, gaslighting, and abuse are everywhere. But when those words are used loosely or thrown around in legal settings, they can do more harm than good, and especially when you're trying to protect yourself and your children. And so today we're going to explore a lot. This is going to be like sipping from a fire hose, the real psychological and physiological impact of emotional and covert abuse, the pitfalls of using clinical or pop psychology terms in court or with your attorney, why survivors often doubt their own reality and how to reclaim it, and the necessity of working with professionals who truly understand abuse dynamics to heal fully, which is why I have, of all people, Annette Oltmans of the M3ND Project with me today. So to guide us through this sensitive and essential conversation, let me just tell you a little bit. Annette is the founder and CEO of the M3ND Project, and drawing from her personal experience and deep expertise, she's devoted her life to educating both survivors and professionals on how to identify covert abuse and facilitate meaningful healing. You can read more about Annette in the show notes, as well as more about the rest of our episode, but we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Annette, I'm so excited for today's conversation.
Me too. It's such an important topic. It's not discussed enough in the general public. Most, even professionals, don't understand it, like you said. And so I love to see any way that we can make this more part of our regular vernacular. We all should understand it. We should know what red flags and pitfalls are out there so that we're not blindsided and overcome and all of a sudden find ourselves spending years in an emotionally abusive relationship, not understanding what it was. So
yeah,
thank you for doing this.
And I think back to my own situation, and it's almost like I doubted my own reality and other people. He's so nice. He's so friendly. What could it possibly be? And that whole like no bruises. I remember saying once to one of my sisters, and I mean no disrespect for anyone who deals with physical abuse at all, but I was like, if he would just punch me just once, if I had a black eye, maybe somebody would believe me. And I have heard variations of that over the 15 years that I've been doing this work.
Absolutely. There's basically 4 pillars that drives an offender's mindset. And that is a sense of entitlement, a faulty belief system, a lower emotional IQ. And on the topic you're just mentioning, the last pillar is image management. They're so good at managing their image and they're so focused on that, although they're behaving entirely differently behind closed doors, that victims have a hard time getting support because others don't believe them. They've never seen this person act in a way that seems abusive. He's putting on a show when he's out in public. Not all offenders do this, but some of them are sloppy and they're jerks all the time. But there's so many covert narcissistic personality types that cover up. They'll create a cloud of confusion. They'll do things like volunteer at their synagogue or their church or in the community and be very philanthropic or whatever. is going to uplift their public image. And so as she becomes more and more unglued and traumatized, she looks like the unstable one, or maybe she becomes reactive. I remember I started surprising myself with my reactions. I was in such a trauma response, a fight, flight, freeze response, and mine was fight. And I was behaving in ways that was not my normal character because I was so triggered and frustrated and angry at the gamesmanship that was going on that I couldn't put my finger on it. And so I looked, I'm sure to others, I looked like the one that had the problem, and he was calm and cool and collected. And I hear that story over and over again play out when law enforcement is involved. They misinterpret who the abuser and who the victim is in the court systems. If she hasn't been counseled well to know how to present herself and to really hold it together and not allow her trauma symptoms to come forward, if she's not well prepared for the slander and the false accusations and all, she gets unglued in a court setting, which doesn't help her. I'm saying her, there's of course male victims too, we all know that. But yeah, they're good at undermining the victim's credibility in their efforts to build up themselves.
You know, it's such a good point and a really important one for us to begin on. I was raised by, I would refer to, my dad was an alcoholic, a jolly drunk, but an alcoholic. My mom was a rageaholic. So even though dad had the more core problem in the marriage, even as one of the kids, to me, my mom was the one who was off the rails. And then my audience has heard my story, but my daughter, it was her 2-year birthday, and I physically assaulted my then husband. I wrapped my hands around his neck, and I started screaming at him. Now, what he had done was horrific, but I was the rageaholic that I had seen in my mom. I was so unhinged. I was so traumatized. I had no control. And the very first thing I had to work on was I immediately went into therapy. And my first focus wasn't what do I do about him? It's what do I do about me? Because I am a triggered hot mess. And this is not helping me parent, and it's not going to help me make decisions about my marriage. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the things that the victim of the abuser would be well served to do in those early stages of just coming to the realization, like, okay, something is very unhealthy and dysfunctional and toxic in our relationship?
Right. I think a lot of victims do understand we have really dysfunctional communication, things of that nature. But so many, I've interviewed hundreds of victims and survivors, and so many of them had such a hard time understanding what the dynamic was, that it was, in fact, covert emotional abuse, those hidden forms of abuse, those manipulative tactics and behaviors that cause so much confusion. And so the most important thing I think a victim can do is really get clarity of her situation. And so on our website, I'll just hold it up. We have like a lot of terms and definitions that describe these covert behaviors like denial, minimization, playing the victim, catastrophizing, lying, broken promises, scapegoating, crazy making behavior, and so many more. When they can actually, what I have found when I'm sitting with someone and I give them that sheet, from a wellspring inside themselves, they suddenly say, finally, someone has the words to describe what I've been going through. And I've been getting stuck in the minutia, trying to explain to people what it's like. And it just makes me look like I'm hypersensitive or complaining. So it's this aha moment that we say clarity is the first necessary step to healing. So that's the first step. And then I think a lot of victims spend too much time because they've been over functioning in the relationship, like doing the work for two people when the perpetrator is hardly lifting a finger and doing anything. So they're so in this over functioning mode where they're trying to save their marriage, they're trying to fix their relationship, that it bleeds over into codependency. And I really like what Ross Rosenberg, he's a therapist and he wrote a book, The Human Magnet Syndrome. He calls it self-love deficit disorder. And I love that so much more than codependency. It's you lose track of the boundaries of where you are autonomous in your own individual person and where you need to perform in a couple. And so they're doing all this work. And the next step is they're usually going, well, how can I change my husband? How can I fix my marriage? Instead of focusing on what do I need to do to heal, to get stronger so that I can make some important decisions, so that I can, when these interactions come up, I can learn how to disengage. I can have good coping skills to not get stuck in that trauma trigger where I start behaving in ways that I don't like. So I think it's so important that they really learn the behaviors that are being employed against them, so they understand the patterns that their offender is using, because they're all different. And then when they come up in a conversation in the next conflict, the victim won't be blindsided. So they can start to gain some control over their trauma response. They can see it coming. They're not just sucked into that vortex of that circular conversation that goes nowhere, leads to no solutions. I think those are the really good places to start that she needs to focus on, and on herself, on being a little selfish, on, even though it's not selfishness, it's just being more healthy and having some boundaries where I can't change another person, but I can look at myself. I can work on my healing. I can get stronger so that I can cope better and think more clearly to make some more important decisions that she may need to make, whether that's to stay or to leave. You need a clear head to make those decisions.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that one thing is on the concept of selfish. I usually will send these 3 articles to clients, very short. One is, what is selfless? What is selfish? And what is self-loathing? Like when you're giving up everything for anybody else but you. And because I think that for me and for so many clients I've worked with, when you're that caretaking person, it's like being told or seen as selfish is like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
And yet everyone who you've trained to expect you to give yourself and give yourself, as soon as you start taking care of yourself, self-loving, they're like, you're so selfish. Right. And so understanding all 3, I was just talking to a male client of mine who's dealing with all types of abuse. And he was like, I feel so selfish. And I said, I'm going to send you these 3 articles because I want you to start getting crystal clear on what self-loving is and how it's different than selfish, and how what you've been doing, which is like you're not on the list and nothing is for you, like falls under Shakespeare's definition of self-loathing. It's like you're not doing anything for yourself. Right. So I find that I love that you brought up selfish. Anybody who's listening, I'll have the link for all those articles in the show notes for you. I think it's so important, that clarity, that it is not selfish to take care of yourself and to heal yourself.
In fact, it's healthier. What they're doing is unhealthy. Yeah. All this accommodating or accommodations for the offender does nothing but make them become smaller and smaller individuals, and they lose their sense of self. So we need to love ourselves. We need to advocate for ourselves. We need to work on our own inner strength, our sense of autonomy, and just have a good, solid sense of individuality. Where these offender types are so controlling, they don't want you to have individuality. They want you to meet their expectations, regardless of how unreasonable they are.
And not to overstate this, but if you've been raising children and those children are, let's say, teenagers, and they've watched you give up yourself and give up yourself, they're going to tell you you're selfish too, because they've been trained to expect a certain type of behavior. And our children can be retrained. We may never be able to retrain our spouse, but our children we can retrain. And so it's so important. I remember with my kids, I would explain to them what I was doing and why I was doing it and how I was a better mother when my cup was full, when my love tank was full, when I had my space and time and took care of myself. And so I really just want to encourage the listener to do the same. I do have another follow-up question on this piece, though, this piece of being triggered and reactive. And I'm wondering if you could speak to a little bit family of origin. Like so many of my clients, their behavior of caretaking or flying under the radar or being conflict averse didn't begin in their marriage. Many of them can connect the dots down back to mom had a bipolar disorder or dad was an angry drunk or whatever. And so the behavior is actually quite historical. Can we chat about that a little?
Yeah. And in fact, I'll say that it doesn't always have to be something as overt as a raging alcoholic or bipolar. It can be something as subtle as their parents weren't emotionally available to them. So it's just a little bit of an emotional distance. They weren't there really helping them understand the child's emotions and saying, well, tell me more about that, honey. Why are you afraid? Or why are you angry? Let's talk about it. Like helping them develop an emotional IQ and helping them learn to trust their own perspectives. Instead, when the parent is unavailable emotionally and just kind of says, children are meant to be seen and not heard, and don't be so dramatic, and all the ways that they minimize the child, then the child grows up with a lack of confidence about their perspective. So they think something is intrinsically flawed about them. They think they're unlovable, or don't know how to communicate effectively. I can't trust myself. I don't know how to do this. And so they are quick to then assume they are the ones who are wrong when their husband is telling them, or their abusive spouse is telling them, it's your responsibility, you're at fault. They tend to believe that because they're empaths. And so they're more self-reflective. Yes. And the offender is not self-reflective. The offender is an outward critic. So the offender finds fault in their partner, and the victim spouse is willing to take on fault, even to a fault that's not their responsibility. And so it's that I can see how that, even from an emotionally unavailable parent that's not even a narcissist, they might just be emotionally immature, they can inadvertently groom their child to choose an abusive spouse, an emotionally unavailable spouse, because that's what abusers are. They're emotionally unavailable. She seeks to have a deeper emotional connection, to have authentic communication, and to solve their problems in a reasonable way. And the offender is just defensive and wants to stonewall her. And I keep saying her, but I want you all to know, I know there are I work with male victims, but it's just easier to say him or her instead of the one who caused harm, the one who
you know what? I appreciate you saying that. And we have about 35% of our listeners are men. And so guys, him, her, we want you to understand that we know that you're facing a similar thing.
Yeah, it's even tougher for men sometimes because it's harder to be believed, and it's scary to come out and use the word abuse when so often you know that law enforcement is more likely to believe that you're the abuser. And so you're in a vulnerable position as a male victim.
My dad was in an abusive relationship, and he was a 6'2", barrel-chested, retired New York City police officer. And shame. There's so much more shame for the men that I work
Yeah.
with. And it's almost like they can't even believe it themselves because of their physical size or because they're the man. And so I think that there are different difficulties for each gender, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, there's this sense from the abuser, like you're not supposed to have needs. Your needs are inconvenient there. You're being too sensitive, whatever it is. And that piece, you said clarity first, self-care second, that piece of growing into I am, I deserve, I'm worthy
Yeah.
is quite a journey for everyone in this space.
It absolutely it is, because it is so ingrained in your neural pathways that you're less than. And I don't think people are necessarily consciously aware of it, but if you sit quietly with yourself and say, how do you feel when you're around other people? Do you feel socially awkward or insecure? Do you get social anxiety? You're likely to feel less about yourself if those are some of your emotions. Or if you are quick to blame yourself and take responsibility, I mentioned that already. It's another signal that you need to sit with yourself and hopefully a good therapist. But I do want to caution, most therapists do not have training on emotional abuse. And so you have to interview them properly and ask them important questions to make sure that you're not going to be harmed in a therapeutic session. But if you can find a qualified trauma specialist, it can really help you learn how to love yourself again and show up healthier in your next relationship and be able to see the red flags and know that you don't tolerate the same things that you did before. I mean, it's such a worthwhile effort to learn how to love yourself for so many reasons.
And I just want to jump on that last statement. I would say if you're listening and you're on the should I mend or should I end fence and you're in marriage counseling, be very discerning about whether your marriage counselor actually is reading the room and seeing what's going on. Because more than anything, I have heard how marriage counseling has been so traumatizing to so many of the clients who ultimately choose to end, but got caught up and confused by an expert who really didn't see the abuse that was going on right in front of them. Have you seen that as well? That when it comes to the marriage counselors, it's like you're sitting there with your spouse and they're doing all the talking or taking up all the space, or it's all about them and what they need. And you're sitting there going, how is this helping?
We say that couples therapy is absolutely contraindicated if any form of abuse is present, because it's it's part of their board protocol to take a neutral stand with a couple. And neutrality when abuse is present only benefits one person, the abuser. What a victim really needs is for someone to 100% align with them and to confront the abuse. When I was in couples therapy with my husband, I remember I would go in and I would bring a concern. I would say, well, this happened this week. And then he would use one of the abusive behaviors, false accusations. He would distort the truth and falsely accuse me of something. And suddenly, and I wasn't yet able to recognize the pattern. And so I found myself in the hot seat defending myself. Next thing you know, 40 minutes goes by because the therapist is asking me more about it for clarification. And we never got to talk about what I raised. And the therapist, this would play out over and over, week after week, and the therapist never picked up on the patterns. And that type of an experience for victims is so traumatic because you view that person as a person of authority and knowledge. And so you have a reasonable expectation that they're going to meet you where you are. And then when they don't, it's so undermining. And then it emboldens the abuser because they feel like they're right. And now you go home that week and they're even more overpowering of you and self-righteous. And it's a traumatic and hopeless situation. So I don't recommend couple therapy. I recommend that you go to therapy and you work on yourself. I do know a good therapeutic organization that does work with abusers. If you want, you can reach out to me. But I say the focus really needs to be on what you can do to get stronger and to get better coping skills.
Yeah, and so we're going to take a sponsor break, but when we come back, I want to talk about how it's not just in marriage counseling, but even when you get into the courts, that part of the clarity that you're talking about, the self-care that you're talking about, how important it is that our listener understands what they're up against so that they can have the right team supporting them. We're going to stop for a break, folks. We'll be back and chatting about that in a minute. Divorce feels like an overwhelming, perfect storm as you navigate pain, fear, and confusion while struggling with unfamiliar legal procedures and the pressure to make complex decisions that will impact the rest of your life. Our free Rapid Relief Call provides the clarity and confidence you're yearning for. Visit rapidreliefcall.com for support and guidance today. Divorce can feel like landing in a foreign country without a map. You don't know the rules, the language, or where to turn. Imagine instead having a GPS, a trusted guide, vetted local experts, and a community that truly gets it. That's what the Divorce Support Network is. With DSN, the confusion disappears. You know exactly where to start, who to trust, and what steps to take. Every answer, every expert, every resource you need right at your fingertips. Go to divorcesupportnetwork.com and grab your free gift today. So the decision is to divorce. We just talked about how marriage counseling can be traumatizing. And then, of course, family court can be traumatizing because the judges, the attorneys, the level of emotional intelligence, the reality about the courts being child-centric when they're not, they just slice up the kid like a loaf of bread. Can you just talk a little bit about what happens in family court and how you would encourage the listener to be prepared?
Yeah, I'm not an attorney, but I will say that there's a posture that the protective parent needs to take. It is as important as it may seem to identify the other parent as an abuser. Now, I'm not talking about physical abuse. We're specifically talking about emotional abuse today. If it sometimes can backfire, and oftentimes it does, you're trying to label a person as abusive. And then if you use the word narcissist, they've heard it 1,000 times. So here's another one. Using the word narcissist or using the word abuse, it's almost better if you it is better if you, as long as you know that your children's safety isn't at stake, that you go out of your way to be fair-minded and cooperative, and that you phrase your sentences. I mean, half the time they don't let the victim ever speak. It's lawyers talking. And so if you have the opportunity to phrase your sentences in a way that it shows that you're focused on what's best for the kids, not trying to get the judge to side with you to understand your personal plight. He doesn't really care about that. He cares about the custody plan. In fact, there's this wonderful resource. It's called Coercive Control Consulting. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I forget, her name is
Christina Cocciola. She was
Yeah.
actually just on the podcast. And
Okay.
she's fabulous.
Well, I love her work, and I love how she maps it out on her website. You know exactly how to say certain sentences that you need to speak to a court-appointed therapist or an evaluator, and even judges or mediators. And I think that everybody that's going to be entering court should take some time and scroll through her website.
Yeah, and that'll be in the show notes for you folks as well, both the episode that I did with her and her website. And thank you for referencing, and Ross Rosenberg's been on the podcast, so his episode is in the show notes as well, because Annette is doing a great job of just pointing out all these experts that the two of us very much appreciate. And to your point, even if you're not speaking to the judge, even when you're speaking to your attorney, because every attorney is told that their client is divorcing a narcissist. And so Annette and I had talked about this offline. When you explain what happened to you, instead of I was gaslit, I was love bombed, he's a narcissist, but rather this is my experience, it's so much more helpful. And one of the things Dr. Cocciola just said on the podcast that she did with me was that if you think that your spouse is not abusing your children the same way you're being abused, you're incorrect. And that was such a bold statement. And she elaborated on it, because we're like, oh, he or she wouldn't, they love our children.
Right.
And yet the way she described it is, someone who does this, they do it. And how you do something is how you do everything, and keep a close eye out, because obviously going to court, it doesn't matter so much what happens between you and mom or dad when it comes to custody, but it does matter what's happening between the parent and the child. And so that's an episode worth listening to.
Yeah, I'm glad you have that, and I'll have to listen to it. It's not always that the focus is on, like you said, the couple. It really is, what is he actually doing with the kids? And there will be some evaluators. It's a broken system, but there are some evaluators and psychologists who are really aware of emotional abuse. So it really serves you well to learn how to present it. I want to show you something that is a tool that we have at the M3ND Project. It's called the Maze of Confusion. And so for those of you that are listening and not watching, if you think of a conversation, think of a maze as a visual metaphor for a conversation. There's one entrance and one exit. There's only one pathway through. And so we represent that by a gold line. And that's the way a healthy conversation would operate. You clarify the issues, you have a desire for mutual understanding, you mutually respect each other, and you want to communicate authentically to move to reasonable solutions. Now, you can agree to disagree, but it's respectfully done. I'm not saying to give yourself up or make yourself small. You're entitled to your opinion, but conflicts that are handled that way, relationships can move forward after a conflict in a very healthy way. The problem is when you're dealing with a covert narcissist or a covert abuser, whatever term you want to use, every other route in the maze is a dead end. And those dead ends, so if considering this is a conversation, when a victim will raise a reasonable complaint, concern, or a hurt, she is met with a myriad of roadblocks, of stonewalling behaviors. In one conversation, she can be faced with catastrophizing. Well, you're never happy, blows it out of proportion, or you're too sensitive. That's minimization. And I think it does help to explain this chronic defensive posturing to an attorney, that rather than using the word narcissist, to use the proper terms for the behaviors, but describe it in the sense that these are the way all of our conversations go. I have no power. I have no voice. He's domineering, or she's domineering, and there's no room for anyone else to speak in. They aren't self-reflective. They're outward critics. They're outward critics to the kids, to me. I think that any attorney can understand that and will see the credibility in that.
Yeah, I love that. That's absolutely critical. And I think that it becomes so normalized. Like, it wasn't until I unweaved myself enough and was in therapy long enough that I could see these dynamics. So if you're not looking at a video version, jump on YouTube and check it out, because Annette has some really cool visuals here, and definitely go to her site and check them out. I think that's going to be so helpful it's just, we get confused and it's murky. And then, of course, we're told we're too sensitive or too stupid or whatever. And what you're bringing to the table is just like shining a beautiful bright light in a dark room. And that's exactly what so many of my listeners need in order to be able to stand on solid ground, rebuild their self-esteem, and then go and advocate for them and their children.
Yeah.
So thank
Otherwise,
you.
oh, you're welcome. I love that you mentioned the confusion, because people are in these marriages for decades, sometimes still not being able to figure out what is causing all this chaos. It's so confusing because when there's multiple behaviors being used against you in one conversation, you don't even remember half the time what started the argument in the first place. You lose track of it because it's so many detours, deflection, all kinds of things that never stays on topic. And so we use a phrase at the M3ND Project that says it's prolonged states of stressful confusion, or what is known as trauma states, because confusion causes a lot of stress anyways. But when it's traumatic, it's recurring trauma, it's
Right.
these recurring conflicts. Now it's post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress,
Right.
which makes it even more difficult to cognitively figure out what's happening. You become more and more mentally and physically compromised. Now your body has so many stress hormones pumping through it that you get autoimmune illnesses, and you don't feel well. You have all kinds of medical problems that are not easily explainable unless your doctor really understands the impact stress can have on the body. And so it's critical that we use whatever tools we can to help bring us clarity and to get those answers as soon as possible so we can help our mental health and our physical well-being. We are really compromising ourselves by staying in these relationships. But I understand not everyone can leave, but then you have to learn, how do you navigate your life when you're with a crazy maker? You have to learn skills for that. And there are things you can learn.
I think that one of the most heartbreaking things for me is when I run into people who are too afraid to leave.
Yeah.
I was too afraid to leave. I often say when the pain of staying is greater than the fear of leaving, we finally exit. And these abusers are a little bit like terrorists, right? Like the fear is just instilled like layer upon layer upon layer.
And they're going to retaliate against you when you leave. So there's oftentimes good reason to be fearful.
And the bad news is it usually gets worse before it gets better. The good news is when it gets better, it's freaking great.
It's
liberation.
amazing.
Like
Yes.
So you have to, you're going through the fire of refinement, which is why it's so important to have podcasts like this one, organizations like the M3ND folks on your side, having really healthy therapists, attorneys who aren't poo-pooing you, but really get what you've been going through. When you use the pain to go through this process, and this is how I would love to end, is just for you to talk a little bit about healing. I will just say that there's so much healing that happens in finding your voice and standing up for yourself and advocating for your children, of going toe to toe with every fear of yours and realizing the sky didn't fall, the earth didn't eat you up. And on the other side of it, the delicious, delightful, pleasurable life of not being in the squeeze of an abusive relationship is, I don't know that I could completely put words to how incredible it feels after spending years or decades in that kind of a relationship. But could you really speak a little bit to healing before we wrap up?
If I can, before I talk about healing, if I could just give a plug that has a little bit to do with healing. We have a course at the M3ND Project for victims and survivors. It's called Finding Clarity in Difficult and Abusive Relationships. And this course it's only 4 modules. It's only $59. And if you can't afford it, we offer scholarships. It's only 4 modules long. It has a little bit of reading and a 1 to 2 hour session, recorded session with me. And graduates regularly report that it saved them about a year of therapy. You won't have the need to ruminate or process over and over again things that you've been through. You will understand the mechanics of everything. You will understand the nuances of your relationship. And then you can step into what we do towards the end of the course, which is healing. What can you do? And I just want to bring up a couple of things. You've already mentioned to really do the therapeutic work to learn how to love yourself. But I would also add that so many victims are isolating because maybe their friends don't believe them. And so they're fearing that anticipatory fear of more trauma if they confide in someone. And so I like to say, don't just shrink your circle to just 1 or 2 people you confide in that are safe, and consider doing other things, stretching yourself to be uncomfortable, like joining an exercise class. So now you're doing physical activity and you're seeing the regular attendees of the class each week, and you have these superficial, lighthearted conversations that produce endorphins that counteract the stress hormones. Take walks out in nature, take a yoga class, do creative outlets. I like to embroider. And so anything that's artistic, that's going to get your mind off of ruminating, is actually going to be producing endorphins and helping you. And then connect with people. It doesn't have to be that you're connecting about the serious topic. You are just going to make yourself more available for outings and activities. I joined pickleball, and I didn't think that I needed a bunch of new friends. I had acquaintances and friendships. I lost a lot of friendships too, because they didn't believe me, but it was just it had a tremendous healing effect on my body to be out and about and having people care about me and me care about them. And so I think that when you do things like, even if it's take a hot bath with a cup of tea, read a good book, anything that you could do to pour into yourself, a massage, a manicure, a pedicure, even if you're doing it yourself, anything that you're doing that's pouring into yourself is going to help you heal. It's going to produce endorphins.
I love that. And so much of what you talked about is getting in your body, and there is that value of getting out of your head and into your body, whether you're doing needlework or going for a bike ride or dancing. And for anybody who feels like I just don't know anybody, meetup.com is such a great resource. Everybody on Meetup is going alone to meet new people. That's the whole concept. And so even grab a friend and go, but that's a great way to
or like joining a hiking group or anything in your neighborhood. I didn't know about that meetup.com.
Yeah, so Meetup has, if you're a photographer, you can join a photography group, you could join a book club, you could join a hiking group, you can join a kayaking or a biking group. So you could do whatever your interest is. You will probably find a meetup near you if you're anywhere close to a populated area. So that's something to look into. Annette, we could keep on talking. I would love for you to give a really thorough definition of the M3ND Project and what you do. And I know you have a free gift, and you've already given us so many resources. Folks, there's going to be every reference that Annette and I mentioned is in the show notes for you. But please, what exactly do you guys do at the M3ND Project, and how can people reach out to you?
Thank you for asking me that question. My dream was to create a comprehensive website for all those people who didn't have the resources to find answers. And I frankly had a hard time finding resources out there. I had to read so many books and scholarly articles and go through so much therapy just to write the website. And so I would say that It is where you're going to find clarity. You're going to find all the language that you need. We have over 100 blog articles on our site. By entering your email address, you can get our free downloadable tools like the Maze of Confusion I just talked about, the terms and definitions, and some other tools. You can access all of our prior workshops that we post we record a free workshop on YouTube once a month where I'll delve into a topic. What we mostly do is we educate victims and survivors, but we partner with the American Psychological Association and we teach therapists. We have continuing education units offered in a course where they learn about this topic. So they get 9.5 continuing education units. If you have a therapist that doesn't quite get what you're going through, you can refer them to our website, or you can tell them about the course that we offer. They have to do continuing education units every year anyways. So it's just something that we feel so strongly about, educating those responders. We also educate a lot of faith-based leaders, because we find that before victims know to go to like a domestic violence service provider for some education, they reach out to their therapist or their faith leader and just say, I have problems in my marriage, and they don't understand. And that's why we so want to educate those people, because they are in a position to do the most harm. We call that double abuse, when victims finally find the courage to speak up or reach out for help, and either they're not believed, or they're criticized, or they're given poor advice that they didn't ask for, incorrect instructions. Sometimes they're even given ultimatums. We see this at churches a lot. Either you go back into couple therapy, or you will be excommunicated from our church, or either you reconcile with your spouse, or pray more, submit more, all these things that are not helpful. The victims have already done all that until there's nothing left of them to give. They've tried everything. And so we just really, as much as we service victims and survivors, we also really care about training responders as well.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And then I do believe the free gift is the free monthly workshop, and there's a link to sign up for that.
Yep. And take advantage of our free tools and resources that you can download. It's very helpful to look at a visual tool to help you retain information. And we have beta tested these for retention value to really help victims that are traumatized and have cognitive thinking problems to be able to retain the information. So I really encourage you to take advantage of that.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for joining me, Annette. Thank you for what you're doing in the world and how vitally important it is.
You're welcome. Well, thank you for what you do. You're such a great resource for people going through divorce and so many other topics. So thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. And please check out the M3ND Project. Sign up, grab those beautiful visuals that could be so helpful for you. And I hope you got a lot of value out of today's conversation. We'll be back again real soon. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us on the Journey Beyond Divorce podcast. I hope you found guidance and encouragement to help you along your journey. If you like my podcast, please take a minute to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. You can also visit us at jbddivorcesupport.com, where our team of coaches support both men and women through our one-on-one coaching, group programs, online courses, and free resources. Stay tuned for our next episode, and I'll talk to you soon.